To tell you the truth, I will just go back and forth on with snippets of my memory of my first 8 years at Cheley Camp. And one of the things I remember vividly is when we were taking a group up to Thunder Lake on a horseback trip, and we got started. It was 6 miles from the bottom of the trail to Thunder Lake. And on the way up, we passed a fisherman in a yellow slicker, and we had 6 brand new pack horses that summer. We'd never had them before. Well, unfortunately, the first horse spooked and started running off into, making a lot of noise and running off into the woods. And everybody ran away from these horses, and unfortunately, the one that was running off first had a 40-pound cook tent on his back, and he ran after me. And I was knocked down, and fortunately, I was knocked down a place where there were a lot of pine needles, or I would have been scarred for life. Because when it was all over, my eyes were swollen shut. You couldn't even find my eyes. And I had the print of a horseshoe on one, the upper leg, and on my shoulder. Well, we had steak, jelly, shoes, well, they weren't bed rolls, they were the blanket rolls for almost 6 miles up and down that trail. And somebody had taken it looked like somebody had taken the number 5 cans of jelly and had twisted them at both ends. You've never seen such a mess. Well, unfortunately, the girl who later married Jack Cheley had gone with us on her first pack trip. And she was a city girl from Chicago, and she was horrified at this activity, and she went back to camp after it was all over, because they took me back to camp and put me in the infirmary. She went over to see Mr. Cheley, and she said she thought pack trips were too strenuous and too dangerous for girls to go on. So, and I remember Granny May, who had the horses, came to the infirmary to see me, and he said, "Now, Mary Tom, just remember, you can never trust a horse. They are dumb." And but it was quite an experience to have that one thing happen. We had very few accidents happen on our pack trips. And one I remember, well, this was not an accident, it was a peculiar experience. We took our horses and started out and walked up over Flat Top Mountain and down the other side to Grand Lake, and then took the horses up to two lakes out of Grand Lake, 13 miles away from Grand Lake, called Anita and Nakona. And Mr. Cheley always sent young men with us on these pack trips to shoe the horses and take care of the horses. And there was a young man from Amarillo that we called Sleepy Smith on that trip. Well, we were all walking up between Lake Nanita and Nakona and Lake Nanita, and there was a little stream there that was just absolutely full of salmon trout, red trout. And Sleepy had a pair of horseshoe pliers in his back pocket. And we were walking along very slowly, and this little stream was just ambling along, and here was a big salmon trout, about 12 or 15 inches long. And Sleepy took those horseshoe pliers out of his back pocket and leaned over very carefully and caught that big trout by the tail and threw it out on the ground. Best fishing I ever saw. And then we had another boy there from Oklahoma who got a hold of that fish that night. It was too big to go in our pants, but he got a hold of it and started to scale it like you do catfish and thing. And I said, "Oh no, you don't take the skin off a trout or the meat will all fall off. You have to leave it on." And I remember his name well. He was a young man from Oklahoma named Johnny Woodard. We went to other fascinating places. As I say, Mr. Cheley let us go down to a place called Monarch Lake, which was close to 200 miles from camp. so that we could climb Lindbergh Peak, what they call Lone Mountain Peak. It was really a very difficult climb, and we had to stretch some ropes across part of it. Well, unfortunately, I didn't get to go to the top because we got a girl who was scared, and she wouldn't go across the rope, and so I had to take her back to main camp, and missed out on an opportunity to climb Lone Eagle Peak, the Lindbergh Peak. We got, as I say, we got to go to other places. Mr. Cheley let us go to Grand Lake one time and put us up in a hotel so we could swim at Grand Lake. And I didn't pay any attention to the warnings that I'd given all of the kids about staying out in the sun too long, and I sunbathed while I was on a wharf out there reading all day long, and I had a blister across my whole back that was at least an inch high, all over my back. And it served me right. I didn't dare tell anybody what I'd done. If you will forgive me, I will go ahead and give just some snippets of what things that happened in the 8 years that I was a camper, junior counselor, an aide, and finally a counselor. In the 8 years I was there from 1933 until 1941. And one of the things I recall when we were aides, Eva, who was Little Chief, we called her, Ms. Cheley, took Julia and Betty Kicksmiller and me into the Stanley Hotel for dinner as reward and payment for our jobs as aides. And aides, back in those days, aides didn't get any pay, although we did the same work that counselors did, and we didn't get a day off. But I think we got our camperships. I'm not sure. I believe we got our camperships for nothing. But at any rate, back in those days, people who stayed at Stanley Hotel had to wear long dresses, and the men had to wear tuxedos, which was absolutely ridiculous for someplace in the middle of the Rocky Mountains where things were supposed to be Western and informal. But at any rate, she took us into the Stanley Hotel for a fancy dinner, which back in those days probably cost $1 a piece. But she had to get special permission from the manager for us to wear our Sunday clothes. And our Sunday clothes were white English pants with high top black English riding boots. And everybody, all the girls at Cheley Camp had to wear white, dressed up white on the Sunday. Another thing, speaking of clothes, Mr. Cheley didn't allow the girls to wear blue jeans. The girls, the closest we could come to tough clothes were corduroy pants, but no blue jeans for girls. And he had a lot of little strange ideas back in those days, but he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And speaking of Mr. Cheley, he served the most wonderful, almost gourmet food. He did not believe in margarine. There was never any margarine sold. It was all butter. There were no cold meats, no bologna, no pepperoni, no meats of that kind, and no ready-made ground meat. If we made chili or hamburgers, he brought in round steak, which we had to go and grind to make hamburgers or chili. And then on Sunday, we had all white meat. And we never could figure out why those chickens had so much white meat. And if we had known that he was serving rabbit, nobody would have eaten it. But it was absolutely delicious. And, as I said, all white meat. Unfortunately, his food was so good that even though I hiked, the last summer I was an aide up there before I became a counselor, I hiked 500 miles and I gained 25 pounds. Well, when I came home and got off of the train, my mother made me walk behind her because I was so heavy. It was all muscle. Unfortunately, when I went away to college that year, I lost it all. But in spite of all the exercise I got at Cheley Camp, I always gained weight because the food, as I say, under Mr. Cheley was so good. The cooks came from, were the cooks from this public school system of Topeka. And I remember one time one of our friends who worked in the kitchen, his father sent him a basket, a big grocery basket full of black-eyed peas. And the cook said, well, we'll cook those black-eyed peas for you Texans, but don't expect anybody else at Cheley Camp to eat black-eyed peas. That's what we give the hogs and the cattle in Kansas. But we ate them anyway, and we loved them. And that kitchen boy and I sat out on the back steps it took us all day long to shell that bushel basket of black-eyed peas. But we, as I say, we loved them. I'm trying to think of some of the funny things. Oh, I will say this, that I had a rather unusual suitor. Well, you're not a suitor, but an admirer one summer. I had kind of disagreed with the man who was to be my future husband, who had cut his hair all off along with two of his buddies, and they were the worst looking things I ever saw in my life. So I said, all right, if you can do that, I'm going to go get my hair cut off into a boyish bob. Well, it turned out to be very, very practical for my job, because all I had to do was just wash it and comb it. Well, one time I took a bunch of youngsters up to the top of Trail Ridge, and back in those days, they had a Navajo Indian up there, a young man who made jewelry at the top of Trail Ridge. Well, we had a camp down in what they call Willow Park, right at the foot of Chapin Mountain, which was just below the top of Trail Ridge. Well, we had all these youngsters down there, and I was in the kitchen. It was a cabin. One day I heard all the kids screaming, oh, there was an Indian outside, an Indian, they were from Chicago and different places, and they thought we were going to get scalped. But anyway, I went to the kitchen window, and here was this young man with some of his gold teeth and his big black hat looking in the window, and he had come calling on me. And he had brought me two gifts, a package of gum and a nickel package of raisins. And he came in, and the kids asked him all these questions about scalping people and so on and so forth, which he didn't know anything about. But at any rate, he came to see me. Well, lo and behold, a few weeks later, toward the end of camp, and of course it had to be on the horse show day when there were a lot of people there, a lot of parents and everybody else. Somebody came and found me, and they said, Tommy, you have a collar. And I went down, and here was this young Indian man who had walked 26 miles from the top of Trail's End to come calling on me. And we sat there all afternoon. Neither one of us knew what to say, except that I knew that he had to walk 26 miles back to camp that night, back to the top of Trail Ridge. Well, when the boys' camp put on their show with the counselors, they had a field day with this young man, and they, teasing me about this young admirer that I had. And one of the things he did have, he made jewelry in the basement of the Palmer House in Chicago in the wintertime. And when I told him that we lived in Evanston, he said, oh, I'm so sorry, I would have come out to see you. And when I thought, oh, I'm so glad he didn't know, because that would have scared all those old ladies sitting in those rocking chairs in the lobby of the Georgian Hotel to death. if this young Indian with his big black hat and his gold teeth had come in to call on me at the Georgian Hotel in Evanston, Illinois. But that was one of the happy, funny remembrances that I have as one of the things that happened to me. And